I just want to welcome everyone to this month's AGU-AGI Heads and Chairs webinar. My name is Leila Gonzalez. I'll be sitting in for Christopher Keene this webinar, and also joining us today are Pranoti Asher and Eva Kostu from AGU. Pranoti is the Assistant Director of Grants and Education Programs at AGU, and Eva is the Program Manager of the AGU Bridge Program.
Thank you, Leila. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I hope your spring has arrived wherever you are, so welcome. So our speakers today are Madison Wood and Adina Paytan. Maddie is a PhD student in the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences at the University of California, Santa Cruz. She received her bachelor's degree in Earth Sciences from the University of New Hampshire. And as part of her graduate studies, she's working on projects that are at the intersection of paleoclimatology, paleoceanography, and isotope geochemistry. In particular, she's investigating seawater chemistry over the Quaternary period. Also joining us is Dr. Adina Paytan, who is a research professor at the Institute of Marine Sciences at the University of California, Santa Cruz. She is also affiliated with the Departments of Earth and Planetary Sciences and Ocean Sciences, and she mentors students and supervises students across both these departments. Her own research studies past and present biogeochemical processes, and together they are here to tell us about this incredible tool, and I'm going to have them take it away and tell us how they got interested in this project and what they've been doing. So take it away, Maddie.
Thank you for that introduction. I'm really excited to be here and sharing this project with all of you today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the GROW project that I've been working on for a couple of years now, and then really focus on some of the outcomes of that project and how I'm hoping you will help us spread that throughout your departments. So as the title of this webinar implies, GROW is a new career tool for our community. So I really want to share what that tool looks like and how you can use it to support students and how they can use it to further their career development. Before we kind of get to those outcomes, I want to start by talking about the motivation, why we took on this project and why we're sharing it with you today as we think about how we prepare students to succeed in the workforce. And then I'll spend a bit of time telling you about the project, the goals and the phases of our proposed project, and then how it's evolved through time to where it is now. And then we'll go through the tool itself and how you can use it. So getting into the motivation, I wanted to start with these infographics from AGI's workforce data. So on the left here is this figure showing the projected growth in the geoscience workforce up to 2028. And we see growth across different portions of the workforce and overall. And then on the right, this is showing occupational status for recent graduates, looking at people who have recently come out of geoscience programs and where they're employed now and pathways between those different sectors. And I just want you to note that that yellow non-academic pool of employment is kind of the bulk of where these graduates are finding jobs. So just starting from a place of recognizing that the workforce is growing and graduates are getting non-academic jobs, we want to think about how we support students in this pathway and getting to that employment pool. Often we hear from students kind of at all stages this question of what job opportunities they have other than being a professor. So, as they're going through their academic careers, those are the geoscientists they see around them every day. And while they're learning all these transferable skills that are applicable outside of the academic workforce, they might not have exposure to jobs in industry, government, policy, and other sectors. There are lots of really great non-academic resources out there for students doing career development, but we're finding that those resources aren't reaching their audiences all the time. So this could be because students aren't members of the societies that are putting these resources out into the community, or they just aren't familiar enough with the landscape of the workforce and the kinds of searches they could do online to get access to the helpful resources. And in the same line, academic mentors often don't know about these resources or haven't had experience looking for jobs outside of academia. So they might not be best positioned to help students navigate the workforce and that job seeking process. I've given this talk for students many times over the past year, and I always like to show them this AGI workforce infographic. And we always talk about how these different sectors that you see in the colored circular bands have a lot of overlap. The boundaries between them are very fluid, and they cover these different fields and all of these occupations that are within those wedges. And I always point out to them that many of those occupations in the wedges don't have the title geoscientist or geologist. And so we talk about how it's the transferable skills that they're learning that equip them to take on jobs that span all of these different subfields, all of the different sectors, and how they can move throughout that. So for this project, very broadly motivating us, we wanted to think about how we could more effectively communicate to students the current and complete understanding of this workforce landscape and all of the opportunities that they could pursue depending on their interests and their skill set. We also wanted to make sure that we were helping students with really concrete and actionable guidance. So not just telling them what jobs are out there, but specifically how to get their foot in the door, how to make sure they're prepared, and to find the jobs that are best suited to their interests. And kind of an overarching theme here is that we're emphasizing transferable skills and using those skills as the currency to navigate the workforce and adapt position to position or sector to sector. So with this kind of motivating us to think about how we can improve how we as a community are helping students to do this kind of career development. At the same time, there was this paper published on reimagining the STEM workforce and development as this braided river model. And so I just wanted to show this because it really closely paralleled the way that we were thinking about developing these resources. So not thinking about just a straight pipeline that students would move through toward the workforce, maybe unfortunately leaking out at certain points. Instead, thinking about it as a holistic workforce and having all of these interlocking channels and different ways to enter and move through geoscience relevant positions. So that is the kind of the motivating landscape that prompted us to put together this proposal for an NSF intern project. So the project is called Developing and Disseminating Information Resources on Non-Academic Careers in the Geosciences. And it's a three-prong proposal. First, we were thinking we needed to assemble and evaluate all of the existing career resources for non-academic career paths that's out there. We know that there are wonderful resources, so we just wanted to pull it all together and see what we have. The second part of the proposal was to then figure out what gaps existed and where we could maybe supplement and create new resources to more fully capture the workforce and all of the opportunities. So some of the things we were anticipating wanting to supplement were things like professional licensing, mentor connections, and how to grow a network depending on the kind of job you might be interested in. And then also specific job information. So not only information that talks about the geoscience workforce broadly, but also information targeted to students who might know they want a government job or they want to work in industry, and really breaking it down into that sector-specific advice. And then the final prong of the proposal is to share that, which is part of what we're doing today, getting this out to our community and making sure that it's useful to students. So I was the grad student on the intern project and was assisted by Adina, the PI, and my advisor as well as Heather Holton, who is from the Colorado School of Mines. She was a consultant on the project and really important for developing all of these resources. And then AIPG was the intern host organization. So I'm just going to walk you through a little bit of the evolution of the project and what this looked like, just to give you kind of a behind the scenes before we get to the outcomes and the tool. We started by combing the internet for resources. So this box on the left is just showing a handful of the places we looked, from professional societies to museums and university websites. And once those resources were collected, we did a lot of assessment, thinking about what kind of information those were providing, whether that was general to the geosciences or more specific to a sector or even a specific position. We assessed whether it was current or maybe outdated and no longer accurate portrayal of the current workforce. We thought about the format of the information and how accessible that was to students. And then we also thought about how these resources were representing diverse identities and perspectives. And then once we had all those compiled into kind of massive spreadsheets of resources, we had to think about what we wanted this to look like. What would be helpful to students, both in sharing these resources and also supplementing them. So fairly early on, we decided that this would focus on undergraduates and graduates, as well as their departments and professors and mentors and the people supporting them. And the scope of the tool and the resources really goes from students who are just starting to explore and just need to know the range of opportunities available, all the way up through those who are applying for jobs and know what they want and just need some support in getting those opportunities. We also thought hard about the format and access. So how would we host all of these resources and content in a way that was easy for students to navigate and also had clear messaging about the workforce and using transferable skills and having an inclusive geoscience community. So this is just a sampling of some of what we developed to supplement some gaps. And I just wanted to acknowledge the folks up here on the slide for helping with a lot of the sector-specific information. So as an example, for communication, there is a lot of broad information out there, but we really wanted to get into what kinds of communication jobs geoscientists are doing and what do they need to do to prepare. So putting together a portfolio to get a communications job looks very different from preparing for a government job. And so we really dug into some of those details and crafted content to share that. We also pulled together more licensing information as we had anticipated. There are great webinars out there, so we distilled some of the information that's provided in webinar form into a kind of snapshot, frequently asked questions, and then also compiled all of the ASBOG resources in one page for licensing. And finally, the last piece I'll share is our Ask an Expert profiles. And these were new career profiles, kind of in the same vein as many collections of profiles that have been put together previously. We got experts spanning all sectors. Some of them are here in this box, just to acknowledge their contribution. And what was specific about the GROW profiles was we really focused on the nonlinearity of career paths and how folks have navigated the dynamic workforce by using their transferable skills. So these Q&A are focused on that message that we're trying to communicate with GROW and really thinking about adaptability and skills and having a career that fits not only your professional interests, but also your personal identity and values and lifestyle. Another thing that is fun about these profiles is that many of the experts provided their contact information. So whether that's LinkedIn or Twitter or something else, many of them are willing to serve as mentors or just provide more information to students. So these can serve as a starting point for students looking to build a network within a particular sector. And then the last piece of this development stage was figuring out how this would all be hosted. And so we ended up designing a website to have all of the existing content linking to external hosts, as well as all of the new content that we created. And we thought hard about how to organize it, how to make sure that students could find the stage of resources appropriate to them. So we've sorted by audience, by career development stage, and also by workforce sector. So it now lives at grow-geocareers.com, and I'm going to share with you kind of what this looks like, the kinds of resources that are there, and how you can take this back to your departments. Before I get into that, I just want to mention that for the third phase of the proposal, we've been sharing this widely with students and also departments. So we've done workshops at GSA and AGU, as well as Goldschmidt. I've done presentations for Mentoring 365 circles and shared this in presentations with GeoPaths PIs, as the NSF intern project is under a GeoPaths grant, and also the GEMS mentoring program. So we're starting to get it out there, starting to get some traction. This is just a snapshot of last month's activity. So it is getting used. People are seeing this and sharing it, and we're hoping that you will help with that and we can continue to build its visibility. So we'll get into the outcomes, and this is a bit of a tour of the tool. And I'm really happy to answer questions and go into this more at the end of this presentation. I want to make sure you know how to use this to support students if they come to you and they say, I would like a government job. Where do I start? You'll be able to point them to a specific part of this tool that is relevant to them. So if you go to that website, this is the landing page for the tool. And you'll notice that there are kind of two pathways in this blue and green button. One is for departments and one is for students. So if you're looking for resources to help mentoring students, you can go through the department entry point, and then students will find the bulk of the resources through their button. I'll also just point out that we have sorted the resources by sector, and I'll get into the details of what is in each of those sections. This is just a map of what is contained in the website, so you have a sense of the scope and where you can find things. For departments is a collection of really great resources that we thought would be useful to folks trying to support student success and also getting them into the workforce. So this is everything from earth science literacy concepts through transferable skills, both what employers are valuing for skills and the preparation of students. There's information on workforce data and how the workforce has changed and will change. We've included some studies on career values that talk about how students might not necessarily be valuing some of our more traditional pictures of the geosciences. So the geosciences as an outdoorsy, kind of rock-loving field is not necessarily what students are looking for. So there's great resources here talking about how students are more valuing careers that help their communities, for example. And so that's kind of an important way to come at this conversation. There's a non-exhaustive list of diversity and inclusion resources for work that we can do in our departments. And also this Unearth Your Future career module that we added recently. This was done by Heather Holton and Danielle Sumi, and it's a career module that can be incorporated into course curricula. And so Grow is part of that module, and we've linked it here so you can think about how you might share that at your department level. And then we'll get into the for students so that you know what is out there for the student resources. So I'm going to walk you through these kind of 5 categories on the for student side. If you enter through that student pathway or button, this will be the landing page. And I'm going to just walk you through some of these Find Your Fit resources, which are really geared towards students who are wondering if they belong in the geosciences or if there's a job that they might want to do in this field. We also have advice from recent grads, which are similar to our Ask an Expert profiles, but they're folks who graduated very recently, most of them actually during COVID, and found jobs. And we'll continue to update that section of the site. So in Find Your Fit, I just wanted to point out that this is kind of a collection of external links to groups that students might want to check out to find peers or mentor support. The same is found under Join a Community, where we have a very long list of all of the wonderful societies and groups that we have in the geoscience community. So this is a good starting point for students to start kind of finding their home, finding how they fit into this field and what kind of jobs might align with that. Getting into the resource collections, the career pathways part of the website is very broad and geared towards the students who are just starting out, figuring out what this looks like. So it's got webinars and also many different collections of kind of what a geoscience career looks like. What do we do in this field? How do you get started? Very broad, high-level resources. And also career preparation stages. So thinking about how far they should go in their education to get different types of jobs, if they need a PhD or a master's degree, if they should think about licensing or certifications. That is all captured in this sort of broad exploration of the workforce. Career profiles is a very similar section, and this is a collection of all of those wonderful profiles that have been done over the years by many organizations. So we've gone in and we've just compiled all of them in one place so that students can go and get a really broad snapshot of the kinds of jobs that are out there. So again, this is for students who are maybe just starting out thinking about this and trying to figure out what's out there. And then before I end the presentation here, I'll take you through the bulk of the jobs by sector resources, which are really helpful for anyone who is at a later stage of career development and thinking about getting a job in a sector that's interesting to them. So for each of these sectors, we've broken out into government, industry, education, communication, nonprofits, and policy. In each one of those, there is a Get Started page with general guidance, the Ask an Expert profiles that I've already talked about, a page about exploring employers where we give really specific examples of the types of agencies or companies or organizations that employ geoscientists. And then that last section is the really important one for students who are actively job searching. And this is the career preparation page. So just using the government page as an example, I'll show you what this tends to look like. It's different for each sector because each one has its own quirks and nuances. So that was why we broke it out into these categories. If you go to the Get Started page, we have kind of a numbered list telling students where to start and then how to move towards the job search itself and the applications. This is an example of those Ask an Expert profiles that we put together. So these are really wonderful resources that I would encourage you to steer students towards. A great range of jobs represented, really fabulous geoscientists who maybe have gone from an undergraduate degree into their position or have gone through a PhD and are now doing this position. So kind of a nice selection for capturing the whole range of possibility here. This is an example of the Explore Employers pages. So for government, this looks like a collection of different agencies and these link to those agencies' career pages where they often have additional profiles or information on how to get started working at the USGS, for example. And then finally, this is the career preparation section. So kind of the last stop for students who are ready to apply, ready to find a job. For the government, we know that getting a federal job is, its own challenge. So we've included information on USA Jobs, this great AGU webinar that talks about the hiring process, and also highlighting things like the Pathways program. So internships or fellowships, whatever specific to that sector that will help students get their foot in the door. And once they've gone through all that information, there's ready to apply assistance that links them to some helpful career resources about applying and interviewing and all of those fun things. And lastly, I'll just mention that GROW also includes a long list of job boards. Some of these are sector specific and some of them are more general, but if a student is at that stage, this is kind of the landing page to steer them toward. So after that whirlwind tour, I just want to leave you with kind of 3 main things that you could do to help us get this project more visibility and also support your students. The first thing is to visit that 4 departments page and go over those resources for supporting student success and retention in the geosciences. The second thing is to share this with your students. And if you know the stage of career development that they're at, you can help them navigate to useful sections that we just went over. And the third ask is if you have any resources that are not yet on GROW, please share those with me and I will add them. And we're also continuing to update the Ask an Expert profiles and the recent grad profiles. So if you happen to know someone who might be a great contributor, you can connect them with me, and that will be an evolving and constantly updated part of the project. So with that, I'll leave you here with the link to the website and my contact information. And I hope we can have a discussion, and I would love to take your questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Maddie. That was terrific. I hope folks can start typing their questions in the chat or raising their hands. While that's happening, let me just ask you one question. I know this has come up several times when you've done this presentation before. A lot of students will say, I'm an international student, what kind of resources would I find on this website? Could you answer that? Thanks.
Absolutely. Yes. So a lot of the resources are fairly specific to the US workforce, but it is still applicable to international students, both in that the kind of general information about the types of jobs and how sectors are different, still relevant. And we also do have international resources. So things like EGU resources, some great career tools from the UK, I think some resources from Canada. So it is largely US focused, but there's a sampling, and I think that it's still broadly applicable, at least in the early stages of exploration, maybe less applicable if you're getting into the actual job searching bit.
Great, thank you. Leela, do you want to take over and take questions from the chat? Thanks.
Sure, and we also, Jim's got his hand raised, so Jim, I'm going to go ahead and enable your mic. Just give 1 sec. You should be able to unmute now.
Hi, I want to thank you for doing this great service for our students, our departments, and actually I think this will be a great service for our country. This is the kind of thing we've needed for a long time, and I'm really in awe of what you've done here. I've known Adina for a long time, and I know she's always does great work, so I'm not really surprised by that. So I want to ask a question. I didn't want to make it sound like I was being too critical.
That was 100% Maddie's work.
Okay, good.
With my encouragement, but it's all her.
Yes, she seems very, very capable. I didn't notice when you listed the professional societies, I didn't notice any that were specific to the mining industry. I'm wondering, is that something that's in included on this, or would you like to see some increased information from that sector?
Yeah, so that list was definitely not comprehensive. So there is different mining societies included, and under the industry sector, I showed you the government one as an example, but in that industry section, there is a whole bit on mining and oil and gas. If you have resources that you don't see there, I would definitely incorporate more. So we're always growing it. It is included, but take a look and let me know if you think it could be expanded.
Okay, thank you. Because I think that's been an underappreciated sector that's set for a lot of growth, and I think it'll take a lot of convincing to get students into that area, because there have not been a lot of careers traditionally, at least in the U.S. in that sector the past 30 years, but that may change significantly in the next 30 years. So I think that's going to be a hard sell, but an important point of emphasis. So again, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
We've got quite a few questions rolling in on the chat. I just want to field one first before we get to Stephen, who has his hand raised. We have a question here from Beth. It says, wonderful presentation and what a lot of work. Can you comment on how long it took to do the collecting and analyzing of all the resources on the site?
Yes, so this started out as a 6-month intern project, and I've ended up working on it for almost 3 years now. So the collection and assessment took a lot longer than I anticipated. It was about a year, actually, assembling them all, making sure we had, representation of all the sectors, and then going through and assessing. And even in the time since I started, some resources have either become outdated or are no longer available. So it's kind of a constantly evolving process that I'm still, checking and changing.
Great, thanks. That's a lot of work. And Steve, I'm going to go ahead and enable your mic, so you should be able to unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And Madison and Adina, I am so excited to start using this with the students that I work with. This is just like, I'm kind of goosebumpy about it, actually. It's great. So as a bit of background, I'm a professor at the University of Massachusetts. I work a lot with undergrads in our undergrad program, our Earth Systems, Geology, Environmental Science program. I've been trying to cobble together bits and pieces of stuff like this just in-house. So this is a phenomenal resource. I'm really intrigued and love to see how you've woven in find your fit throughout, because I think that's so important. Going back to the summits on the future of undergrad geoscience education, we've increasingly been recognized that, like as you said, Madison, that the model of people who like to go run around outside and bang on rocks may not be resonating very much with everyone who could really have a great contribution in the geosciences. I have a question about the Find Your Fit, or maybe just an opportunity. I'm trying to think of how exactly to. So, in my own experience working with students, I find that low income and first generation college students really struggle with some aspects of seeing themselves in the geosciences. Finding jobs is a real critical concern for this group of students, and as we know, like so many others, they're severely underserved with many financial and social barriers to access in the geosciences. Are there any plans to incorporate resources, particularly for students who may be the first in their family to go to college or coming from a very low income working class background? And if so, can I come play with that and get involved? Because I think I'd really like to be able to participate in something like that if that'd be open. That's my question. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Any contribution is absolutely welcome, especially in that area. So I'll talk a little bit about how we try to incorporate it into the student side of things. I also, as I mentioned, have that for department section. And so in there, we have resources that are kind of in that vein, targeted more at you all to make sure that when we're having conversations with students, these things are, foremost, and we're considering this and considering the student's background. We didn't necessarily have resources talking directly to students about those issues, but instead tried to weave in the find your fit or the belonging aspect by being really careful in the picture of the workforce and the geosciences that we're putting forth with GROW. So as an example, when we do our Ask an Expert profiles, we were really careful to make sure that we had representation kind of across all of these intersectional identities. So making sure that, you know, we're not only representing geoscientists who had a very traditional path, but those who might have been first generation or came from a very different background and found their way in to this field from, you know, an undergraduate degree in a very different field. So kind of encompassing not just the first generation or disadvantaged background students, but students with, you know, very intersectional identities across these kinds of issues. The find your fit approach was to make sure that they can see themselves reflected in the resources that we put out. And then we thought about kind of behind the scenes how to get mentors and, you know, people like those of us sitting in this room to make sure that that is part of the conversation as we're helping students. So if you have ideas for how to incorporate that to a greater extent, I would love to talk about it, and I'm sure that we can do that.
I'll just add that in the Ask the Expert, people share their story, including information about their background or challenges that they faced sometimes.
Yes, those are very geared towards personal narrative and more of, you know, a career journey with discussion of all of these concepts that are really important in the job search, but we're focusing on the person. And I hope that that helps students see themselves belonging.
So when Maddie did workshops in these conferences, she had also introduced some kind of a transferable skill hands-on activity where people actually describe these and discuss that. And that also helps with kind of making or finding the fit, where people realize that they don't need to, you know, go on a field trip in order to find a job in the geosciences, for example.
Some other questions coming in through the chat. One is about the longevity of this website and project. So, you know, what are the long-term plans for this? How long is this going to be continually updated for? How much longer? I mean, have you thought about the longer-term life cycle of this? And can you comment on that?
Yes, that's an excellent point, because that's something we came across as we're compiling these resources, is that there'll be a great project, a great push to do something like this, but then it quickly becomes outdated. So I am in the 4th year of my PhD right now, and will be kind of continuing to work on this until I'm finished. And then we're having discussions about what it'll look like afterwards, with one idea being to partner with a professional society and have them take it under the umbrella of an educational program, and potentially have, you know, like a society internship where it's updated over the summer annually or something like that. So we're thinking about it. We have ideas, but we don't yet concretely know exactly where it will live in the long term.
Great, thanks for that answer. Got some more questions coming in about different industry sectors. So do you have coverage of state government jobs, or again, going back to the international component, anything from Canadian Federation of Earth Sciences and Canadian jobs? Can you talk about that, about kind of that industry sector coverage?
Exactly. So thinking about the government, we do cover state governments. So everything from federal governments, state government, local governments, and also tribal governments. We don't have the international focus for that sector specifically. So we tried to cover all levels of government for the US, and don't have information for Canada.
Pranoti, do you have any other questions too?
No, but I do see another one that is happening, that is in the chat. It says, are there resources for geo-adjacent careers such as journalism or finance? And I was wondering if you want to address that, Maddie.
Yes, that's kind of an underlying motivation for this project, actually, is to make sure that we're talking with students about these adjacent career paths and not just things that are maybe more traditionally considered geoscientist jobs. So absolutely journalism. The whole communications sector section of the website is focused on journalism, science communication, kind of media of all forms, and really gets into the details of SciComm and that community, which of course has room for geoscientists and also folks from many, many different backgrounds. The same for things like finance. So the industry sector is not only inclusive of what we maybe would traditionally consider industry jobs for geoscientists, but we also talk about things like working in finance or these more adjacent fields that still use things like data science, GIS skills, and really broadening the picture of that industry that we're sharing.
I would love to ask another question, Leela, unless there's other questions coming in the chat.
Go ahead, Pranoti.
Okay. Sorry, Adina, you were going to say something. Go ahead.
think there was one question about if there is a section highlighting specifically community college students or transfer students.
There's not in the sense that there's a section for students who are transferring in to go to. That might be a good thing to add. Instead, it's designed more by career development stage. So I imagine if someone's transferring in or coming from a community college and maybe is less familiar with, how the workforce is laid out and the different degrees and licensing and whatnot available. It's more designed for anyone coming in who wants to learn about those things, but we could potentially consider having a resource section that's specific to the needs of that demographic.
Great. Let me ask you another question. Since this is a NSF funded project, I'm sure you're doing some sort of evaluation, and are you able to share anything about what kind of responses you've had, what kinds of things you've done, because you got some questions you didn't have that. So can you walk us through how the website is evolving as you're getting feedback?
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of the feedback has come from these workshops that we've been doing with mainly students at the society meetings. So GSA, Goldschmidt, and AGU were 3 workshops that we did. And a lot of the feedback has been around how we frame our discussions and activities about transferable skills. And so that has made its way into the website in making sure we're emphasizing specifically like in career preparation, in those sections, the kinds of skills that are relevant to, say, communications or policy jobs, and having really explicit content around those kinds of concepts. So that's one example. It's also been interesting to hear from students in the workshops. A lot of them are graduate students, maybe by the fact that we're at conferences and many graduate students are attending, but it's definitely made me think more about adding resources focused more for graduate students, whereas when we started, we were definitely considering undergraduates a little more heavily and those who maybe haven't been around in the geosciences as long, but definitely it's shifting to make sure that graduate students are in the scope of these resources.
Great, that was terrific. Adina, I see that you answered a question about links on REUs and internships. But where would a student find them? Like if a student is wanting to look for those, how would they navigate through the website to find them? Where would they be located?
Yes, so any kind of internship or fellowship or research experience, we kind of think about those as the getting your foot in the door or getting the experience or the skills. So they're mostly located under the career preparations sections for each sector. So there is overlap in those. We've sorted it by sector, but for example, REUs and different research fellowships can kind of span all of the sectors. But there are also things like the media fellowships or policy fellowships, and those would be found under the relevant sector.
Great, thank you.
And Beth, it looks like you've got your hand up. Let me go ahead and unmute your mic. So you should be able to unmute now.
Thank you. I'm visiting you from Canada. I'm with the Canadian Federation of Earth Sciences, and I was really fascinated by the idea of this webinar and made sure that I attended because I'm on a group of people that is working on a revising careers website for youth to get into post-secondary in earth sciences. And so I'm excited and gratified that our philosophy is sort of mirrored by yours, or vice versa, in that we're trying to talk to people about what a geoscience degree or what those skills that you would acquire through a geoscience degree could do for a career and how wide and broad that is. Same idea of making sure people visiting the site can see themselves in these jobs. So same ideas of profiles. So that's pretty exciting. But I'm wondering if there is a sort of partner project or an idea of doing the same thing with this site, in that you could reach down into high school, into middle school, and do a similar project to bring them into post-secondary, because that is a big part of the problem of having geoscience workers, is having people interested in studying geoscience.
Yes, absolutely. I think for the purposes of this project, it quickly grew. So we did have to kind of draw that outline and say, we're going to focus on students who are getting the degree and looking for a job. But I absolutely agree that if we're thinking about our community and the workforce holistically, we need to think about all the way back to getting people into these degree programs to begin with. So I think at this stage, we can certainly add to the website anything that is done externally, like something like what you're working on, to direct students to that. But I don't see us building out like a partner project in the near future. But I agree that it's a great kind of parallel project.
I'm excited because I can see that a lot of the information that you have here would help us to frame arguments for getting people into the field as young people as well, right? Yeah. So just all of that talk about how do you get started. We're going to have a whole page about, what can you do now to get yourself ready, like go join a rock and mineral club and find a mentor and all those kind of things. So this will be really useful to me in both my job at the university I work at, but also in sort of things to think about adding to the website we're building for youth. So thank you very much for this work. It's a ton of work, and I need to find somebody to fund a similar intern project for us here in Canada. But thank you very much.
So Leela, do you see any other questions coming in?
I think we've covered them all in the chat. So do you have any other questions, Pranoti?
No, none that I can think of. If there's anyone else that has a question that you would love to have either Maddie or Adina answer, please raise your hand. Adina, you just unmuted yourself. Maybe you want to share something.
I just wanted to say, for those in the audience that are interested in looking at project or programs that span the transfer from K through 12 all the way to college, then I would just say to look at the NSF GeoPaths program within the geosciences, because they have lots of opportunities there for funding programs that span throughout the geosciences, involving teachers, elementary school through high school, college, transfer students and whatnot. And that's an amazing program, and they have the best ever program director in NSF, who's always, that group is always approachable and supportive.
Right. Thanks. So, Leela, I don't think there are any other questions. We could wrap it up, I suppose.
Okay, sure.
All right. So great. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Of course, a recording of this will be available, so make sure you feel free to share it amongst your networks, as you know, to help them disseminate this project. But also, if you want to go back and sort of review all the things that were covered. If you're interested in and if you think of other questions, or you're interested in sort of the Heads and Chairs community, please reach out to me via email. I'm happy to connect you back to Maddie or Adina, or anything else that you're interested in. If you are interested in participating in the AGU Heads and Chairs workshop that typically takes place at the AGU meeting in December, please reach out to me and I'll be happy to add you to the list of folks who get emails about it. And Leela, if we could go to the last slide. We have another webinar that's coming up that may be of interest to this audience. This is the work that AGI does, in their workforce department. This is the results from the 2021-2022 student exit survey. So I think it sort of is a nice match to the today's webinar. So if you're interested, please go to AGI's webinars page to sign up, and hope to see you then. Thank you very much, Maddie and Adina. This was truly terrific. And thank you to all of you for spending your time with us on this Friday in the spring. So have a great weekend, everyone.